Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry it's been so long. We had some, we'll say some delays and with some of our planned speakers, and finally just moved things around and brought Theresa up to talk to us today about heuristics for ideation. So really excited to have you here, Theresa. And if you'll go to the next slide, I can quickly do a intro. There we go. Okay, so meet Theresa. She works with us at Search Discovery. She's a senior manager of optimization. She's had more than 12 years specializing in digital and all the strategies related therein. And she has a really strong focus in both qualitative and quantitative, because we don't just do experimentation, we do research and experimentation at Search Discovery. She's been with us since 2019, and she's been consulting for 6 years and previously ran the analytics team for Kohl's. So here's all the different ways you can reach out to her. And throughout her presentation today, there's going to be this link, this tiny URL, which I will also pop into the TLC Slack. And you all are welcome to hop in and download that white paper. We have a Search Discovery, the team at Search Discovery created a white paper that covers multiple ideation strategies, not just the one that we're going to go through today. And so a lot of the stuff that she's going to cover on heuristics is covered in that white paper, as well as other strategies like comparative and behavioral, voice of customer, design thinking and whatnot. More importantly than all of Theresa's experience in experimentation and research, she's also a mom, and which is like a, cruise, what do you call it? A cruise coordinator?
Cruise director.
Cruise director. Yes, yes, yes. 3 beautiful children, dance mom, Daisy Troop leader, all the things that come with being a working mom. So Theresa, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's get started.
Yeah. So today we're going to get psyched for US or for UX. We kind of initially built this for a team of entrepreneurs, this presentation. And when Kelly saw it, she was like, hey, it'd be really great if you brought it over here to TLC. I said, awesome. And it is. It's one of these ideation strategies that we kind of employ, and we can build hypothesis libraries from. It's one of the many methods. So as Kelly said, there is that link to the white paper. I didn't even write the heuristics section, but I definitely borrowed from it in this presentation. And we have a lot of different players who can answer lots of different questions on this if you do talk to any of us. But really the whole focus of this is how can you build a customer-centric site and think about it using these psychology principles and heuristics. So first thing, and I think some of this, as I said, the audience we originally kind of built this for was a little bit newer to the concepts. So I might like kind of skim a little bit fast through the beginning here of like what are heuristic frameworks and why we use them. Then we're going to talk a little bit about designing for viewing. Another one I think most of you guys have probably already seen or been familiar with, but we'll give a brief overview. Please speak up at any point if you have an additional question or you want me to go a level deeper for what I can do. And then really my favorite part of this is talking about 7 psychology principles that I've pulled out and highlighted and show some really great examples of how they live out in the wild today. And then finalizing it with some really actionable, a lot of people have forms on their sites. What are some of those best practices and how are we applying those principles to it? And we'll try to do all of that in an hour. So we'll see how far we get. So heuristics frameworks, I stole this from a slide that Justin and Sminger, who many of you know is really funny, and he wrote the tagline on this one, we read people's mind, just kidding, there's actual science to this, when he and I did a workshop together about ideation about a year ago. But what are heuristics? They're simple, efficient rules that people use to form judgments and make decisions. There's a missing line from this slide, which I think is important to call out. And that's that it's you're doing it with incomplete information. So we don't know everything. This is just we're using what we have to make that call. It also goes by other names such as best practices or rules of thumb, or thinking about them all as mental shortcuts on how to make those decisions and judgments. We believe, for certainly at Search Discovery, and as I've practiced it out in the wild, I think of it as heuristics are truly based in both experience and research. And then we kind of have grouped them into these 6 different categories. So the idea of, you've all heard about Nielsen Norman Group, they have a list of best practices, but this could also be any of those UX checklists you see out there or rules of thumb that you might follow. Psychology principles, we're going to go through 7 that are actually not even listed on this slide today, but individual principles of cognitive load, talking about cognitive load, persuasion, things like that. When we talk about neuroscience, we think about what might evoke responses, or those thinking systems 1 and 2. So what are the actions for everyday decisions versus more complex decisions, and how can we tap into those? Other things like the brand marketing and sales, where we talk about social proof, can be considered a heuristics. The hierarchy of conversion needs is another one that falls under like expert opinion. And if we think about it, everything that we do in testing and optimization can really be eventually turned into a heuristic by building those case studies or our former knowledge, things that we know that have worked over and over and over again. Especially in a consulting world, we often see, we're like, oh, I've definitely seen this work, 4 out of 5 times. It's worth a try over on your site as well. That becomes a heuristic from your own experience. But like all good methodology, there are pros and cons. So if we talk about pros, it's void of a personal opinion or preference, because you are using at least some sort of format to kind of go along and what can be done. But a con is that it doesn't involve any of your customers' opinions, or you don't know directly what's affecting them. That kind of reduces into the next one as well. The pro being, it reduces that bias by looking at those best practices and principles, but then it could highlight problems that are not relevant to that user base because you don't have that feedback in form. It's easy to scale research, generally doesn't require many tools or subscription, or you can kind of just go out there, look at a page. You can even research one of those UX lists, Nielsen Norman Group, whatever, and take that format and apply it to your site. But you do need to have a little bit of a sense of what you're looking for. I think when we gave this presentation last time, one of the best things that someone said to us at the end was, wow, this is like, I see it all the time, but no one's ever called it out to me, and looking for that consistency and things like that. So having someone point out to you what these things are makes you more aware of it. And that's kind of what I'm hoping you guys are going to get out of this presentation today. It's generally a short timeline and it's easily repeatable. So you could do this in a couple hours sitting at your desk, even an hour, get a couple ideas and move forward with it. You can do it on one page, you could do it on multiple. But the important thing to also note is best practices are evolving. Obviously, I've been working in this space for over a decade, and the way websites looked 10 years ago is nowhere near what it looks like today. Things that I had in best practice category for how to shop a website at Kohl's even 6 years ago might not be applicable to some of the retail clients that I would talk to today. So just always having to keep that in mind. So designing for viewing, we're going to cover 4 areas. Visual hierarchy, I'm pretty sure most of you are very familiar with that. We'll kind of speed through that slide. Viewing patterns based off of some eye tracking software that we've seen. What are some of just those best practices for copy and imagery? And then a quick reminder around accessibility. So visual hierarchy, remembering things like color and contrast. In considering your color saturations, bright colors meaning more important items, less saturated might be less important. Warmer colors generally indicate warnings and error. But obviously we also don't want to use too many colors. We want uncomplicated design. So think about 2 primary, 2 secondary is kind of the rule of thumb that has kind of been thrown out there. Effective designs often use different treatments for headers, subheaders, and body text. This kind of feeds into thinking about scale. So how big is one, how bold is one, what color is one, and how can you kind of, use those things in combination. And then obviously also by grouping things. So where do you want the big banner notice? What do you want to be smaller copy? How is that all playing together? Visual hierarchy, really kind of using it to help draw the eye to the most important things that you want them to talk about as they look at your page. I'm sure many of you have read or looked at studies around viewing patterns, really kind of looking at there's both the F and the Z kind of studies that have been out there, or people have kind of drawn to, with F saying it's a little bit better for text or heavy content related pages. I also think about this being really important for product assortment pages when you're trying to dive into that information. We talk about that 80% of the attention really exists on the left side of the page and 20% of the attention is on the right. And that holds true for both of these viewing patterns. But the Z is a little bit better if you have more space. I see this a lot of B2B related sites. So here's our headline. Let's get to our value proposition. Let me tell you why that's important. Let me go back down again. Most people don't read, but they do scan. And so this is kind of the way that they scan through their pages.
Theresa, Enrique asked, does that change for languages that read right to left?
I do not know. I have not read any studies on that fact. We can definitely look into that. I like when these questions come up. So by the way, when I don't know an answer, because it gives me a reason to research more. I can't say that I've worked heavily in international where that has existed previously. So I have not had a chance to look into that, but it's a good question.
It's a great question.
If anyone else knows an answer, feel free to pop up. Some of the other studies that have existed out there is this iQuant study that existed, which talked about where impressions are made. And specifically, we think about hero images, which often take up a lot of our top half of our page above the fold. And first impressions generally form in less than a second. And they really focus in on that red area, then the yellow area, and then the green. And this, I just pulled a screenshot from the Trello website to kind of focus in on what were people really seeing that would have lived in those red, yellow, and green quadrants. And when we talk about this too, we also want to talk about copy and imagery, and so where it lives on the page, but also how we're kind of displaying it out. So the logo is one of the site sections that gains the most amount of attention from users, and in general from that study, they spent just under 6.5 seconds kind of focused on that area of recognizing it, looking at it, making sure it's the right one, all of that. And a clear hierarchy helps support how pages get built out, because as we discussed in the previous slides, like users scan and they don't read, and so they lose interest as they go further down. Dominant headlines, they draw the eye, and the eye tracking study observed that big headlines often draw the eye first upon entering the page, especially when they're in that upper left corner, but that shouldn't be a surprise. And the best practice is to complete a value proposition within the headline, but keep in mind that clarity trumps persuasion. So you may have a really catchy headline out there, but if they don't know what you do, or they don't know if they're really in the right place, it means nothing. Visibly bigger introductory paragraphs improve attention, but again, they're scanning, so they may not acquire everything that's in there. So while you may have a couple of really good 3 sentences, again, make sure that they're easily catchable from a scanning perspective in order to move forward with it. Likewise, we know different things about imagery on these pages. So forward-facing people generally do a little bit better. There's lots of studies out there that talk about that to drive more of that visual attention as well. And my last call to action around how we're thinking about it as we're just designing our sites and putting them out there. So we've talked a little bit about how we create hierarchy, how we kind of might want to structure the page, where we want to draw attention to, but we haven't talked anything yet about how we want to make sure that our sites are accessible. If you can't consider all disabilities, you do want to consider blindness. 80% of accessibility issues are related to blindness. So we don't just want a typical point and click, how would they get around my site? We got to think about readers and how might they scan the site? What might they be saying? So do we have good alt text in place? Have we tagged our hamburger menu so it reads menu and it doesn't just get skipped over? Make sure that we have all of our important content in the center of the pages, not off to the peripheral where, again, it might get missed. And making sure that we test accessibility with real users. So if you have the opportunity to do some sort of usability test, even on old school, I can remember working in New York City and like going down and giving people $5 coupons to come in and like test our sites. How does that work today? And how can you employ that? And there's certainly tons of tools out there that could allow you to test for those sort of individuals and really kind of think through it. Make sure you don't disable Zoom in mobile interfaces. I don't see this one frequently, but it is a call out for sure. And accessibility is cheaper when it's done up front, when you plan for it versus having to go back and correct for it. I always put this one in there because there are certain regulations, especially if you are government related, about how accessible your site does need to be. There are websites out there that can give specific directions on that. Happy to direct you to them at the end of the presentation if you need them. Beware of visual bias, but remember that accessibility does not necessarily mean ugly design. So you definitely can do this in the right way. Just take some planning and pre-thought. I think this goes universally, regardless of if you're doing it for a planned disability or not, but mobile accessibility, mobile usage, just make sure everything is always mobile friendly. And it's all about an attitude. How can you embrace the all access kind of thought process? Now we get into the fun part, which is talking about these psychology principles. These are the 7: the von Rostroff effect, serial position, intrinsic cognitive load, Hicks law, law of proximity, Jacob's law, and dual coding theory. I saved my favorite for the last. And I hope you guys kind of enjoy some of these really obvious best practices, really obvious, I can't believe I don't do this today on my site kind of thought thing. And it brings it to the forefront because I think it's really interesting when you think about how it really, we don't even know that we're doing it in our design, and we don't even realize how we could be doing it better until someone points it out. So the von Rostroff effect, also known as the isolation effect, is basically, it predicts that when there are lots of things that are all the same on your site, what differs is the one that's going to stand out. We most commonly do this just by default when we think about our CTAs. We change them in different colors. We make them a slightly different shape. We add effect by changing on a hover, on a rollover. So it really is that scanning, where do I go to click, what do I do next, that look at me sort of consideration. But where else do we use it? We use it with banners. How can we make alerts? Definitely, if you were in any sort of a healthcare related industry, you had an alert out there related to COVID-19 in the last 2 years. What's the most latest thing that could kind of happen? Where could it stand out? But likewise, we can take this same theory and kind of flip it on its head and think about how we might do a monochromatic design. So as much as we want to think about bright color, call out, stand out, this one thing, how else can we also make everything else kind of blend in that's not nearly as important? So how can we keep that attention in the right place? And I think at Nordstrom's, if you've ever been on their site, it's all black and white, except for a little pops of pink here and there. So the von Rostroff effect, again, we see this a lot with plans and pricing pages. We don't even know we're doing it, but we don't even know what it's called when we're doing it, but how can we upsell? How can we increase conversion? How can we draw attention to the one we want them to pick? So obviously Netflix wants you to sign up for premium. It's their most expensive one every month. It gives you the most amount of people who can log in at the same time, but let's shade the other two lighter colors and let's make this one really bright red. We also see this sometimes that people put circles around them, or in the case of Box over on the far right, they even put it so it's set back versus more forward. So again, how can we make it stand out? The serial position effect, this was one I honestly never thought about until I researched it further. And it's the propensities of users to best remember the first and last. But when we think about this, how we could be using it out in the wild or what we could be doing day to day on our site, it's really like, think about your order of navigation. Put your most important links first and last. I see this a lot with nonprofit related sites. That's the second one down on there. So about us, learn about our mission, why we're here, what are we doing, and then donate, because this is ultimately what I need from you. Even the top one in that is actually the search discovery navigation. Again, about us, what do we do? Who are we? How could we help you? All of those important links are right there under the about. But then what do we really want? We want you to contact us. So let's put that as our last. We see this also with some of the upgraded thought process in the way that mobile navs are existing, and that they're going back to being a bottom bar, a little less out of the menu, out of the hamburger menu. And again, you only really have space for 4 or 5. So how do you pick what's most important? Going home is generally one of them. And then actually an account or a shopping cart is generally far over on the right, is what we're kind of seeing. Additionally, this one can really be also paired with Miller's Law, which I did not include in this presentation, but if you're familiar with Miller's Law, it's often called the magic number, which is the average number that the human brain can handle is 7 things in their mind, plus or minus 2 at a time. So really your navigation bar should only show 5 to 9 categories, like max, in order to have the right cognitive load kind of be processed. But how else is it used? Certainly it's used in the sense that we always want to be first in our search results. It's the first one people see, it's the first one people click. I've definitely even heard from some usability studies that this must be the most important. There is some people out there who don't even understand the concept of how we can optimize for keywords, or that we might pay for that position, but maybe this is the most relevant. This is what Google told me was most relevant. So that's why it's up at the very top. So be it paid or natural, obviously wanting to be up at the very front is very important. But other ways, Amazon's using it by utilizing this kind of effect with monetization of their site. They want you to buy their brands. They get the most kickbacks associated with that. It could also be a way to monetize a product selection on your site. So saying, hey, we'll give you that first spot, that featured spot. Sometimes it's even whole rows when we look at category related pages. But how can we, drive people's attention, get them to recognize your products, and hopefully the sell-through would be higher, that you would then be able to continue to sell that space to other people. The next one is intrinsic cognitive load, which I'm gonna be completely honest, I almost didn't understand when I first was reading about it. And it's kind of like, it's the difficulty associated with specific instructional topic. And so making sure you have both copy and microcopy that make sense and that align. So if you just said you have not purchased any or received any tickets for any events recently, that Ticketmaster example all the way over on the right, you might be like, okay, that's great, but I did. What do I do next? Like, it's like you end up feeling like you're lost or you're stuck or at a dead end and you don't know what to do next. So the idea of these null results pages, the best practice is really being able to have a copy and a micro copy that really, with a CTA, that really speaks to how you can get out of whatever issue you're running into. So Airbnb, when you're ready to start planning your next trip, we're ready to help, click learn more. They probably could have taken that another step, and they could have said, sorry, we don't have any records for current travel, but if you're looking to book now. Or I like the fact that, Ticketmaster says, hey, maybe this just needs to refresh. So if you just purchased, refresh, take a look, let's see if it can kind of come back up. It really provides some short-term memory support and uses recognition rather than recall. And one of the big things to do here is avoid visual clutter. You don't necessarily need too much to convey the messages. Make it simple because you want it to be understood, and definitely know your users. And so I have 2 more examples on the following slide that are pretty similar. When we talk about 404 messaging, one of my favorite visual slides in this entire deck. We talk about Pixar. They do it good, right? They say, oh, don't cry, you just got this error. It looks like it's been misplaced in long-term memory, but they don't tell you how to get out of it. They dead-ended you. You're stuck here. So I guess my choices are to X out or hit my back button. Hopefully maybe get somewhere else. Maybe they have a navigation bar at the top I could click, but we all know not all landing pages have those. Better, Lego's site. Sorry, we didn't find anything, but you're still awesome is actually what the micro copy says there. But start shopping. Okay, so most likely you came to the Lego store because you want to shop. Let's get you back into that funnel. They provide a CTA. But really the best one is this Cars website and it says, sorry, we sent you the wrong way. Let's guide you back. Head to the car chooser and find your perfect car, or go back to the home page. So providing two different locations. So either you're here to look for a car and let me get you to our product selection, or hey, you might be doing research, you might be looking at us for something else. Here's our homepage to kind of restart where you are, but you're not dead-ended. You know what you want to do next. Another one that we often see out there is related to search results. Obviously, I purposefully did some bad searches on these sites, but it is always interesting what they come back with when you do that. So good in trying to search for Rocket Ship Bank, which actually was completely spelled correctly, just not a product they had. They're saying we're unable to find it, but here's 8 results you might be interested in. But they don't give me a chance to research. They don't tell me why I might not have been able to find it, why they were unable to find it. It just says, okay, here, you can look at these other things. Better, we couldn't find a match for my search of supercalifragilistic. Check the spelling, or try a different search. So, okay, this didn't match at all. And what I don't show is they did actually have, these are some of our most popular items. They had nothing that related to the keyword that was in there. So, okay, they gave me a little bit of results. And then they also said, we couldn't do it, but it could be your spelling. So maybe you need to go back. And then the best one is, there are no results for your search, but here are some ways you can fix that problem. You can try out broader search words, fewer keywords, double check your spelling. You can also enter in a product catalog number. And then here is your search bar, big and bold, and right there again in front of your face, research. Let's get you the right thing you're looking for. Hicks law. So this is, you guys have probably all employed this in some form of your testing. It's saying that the time it takes for a person to make a decision depends on the number of choices available. The more things that people have to go, is this me? No. Is this me? No. And then the more things they have to remember. I use the relationship of one of my roles in my previous life was working in the call center. And if you have someone call in and you are listening to those numbers go off. So press 1 if you need accounting, press 2 if you'd like to hear our hours and operations, press 3 if you'd like to move to this department, whatever those things are. As they're rolling through those numbers, you're remembering, okay, does 1 fit me best at this time? No. But let me remember what 1 is in case nothing else fits what I'm good at. Okay, 1, 2. Oh, maybe hours and operations is better, but really I wanted to know if they have a specific product in stock. So then maybe it's department. Okay, but now which department do I need? And you're building that cognitive load in those call centers. And that's not much different than what we're talking about here. We want to make sure we're reducing that cognitive load by really only figuring out what choices might be most relevant and what groupings they might exist best for the customer who's using your site. So this always comes with a little bit of a choice on your own end. Obviously, we want to see data, and we would love to have people pick out 9 items and self-categorize into it. It allows us to create a bunch of different segments, look at our data differently, but it becomes really hard for them to use it. Easier, right? If we scroll it, make it a little bit like, they only have to view or chunk it little bits at a time. They can discount earlier ones. But easiest is if we know ultimately we are only going to sort our users, let's say by organization size, and it's really going to be organizations that are less than 50 people, less than 1,000 people, less than 5,000 people, greater than 5,000 people. Those should really be the only buckets that we're putting out there. Because anything more is going to bog down their weight of trying to figure out what the right answer is for them. And for us, we might not actually be actionalizing on that. Wow, that's a hard word for me to say this early in the morning. But I think you guys have all really kind of probably seen that. And there's a few other examples of how we use it and how else you guys can employ it on your site. Think about how you might be filtering. So even things like a resource library that might be blog categories, research papers, white papers. It doesn't just have to be product filters, right? The traditional filtering that we all think of. It could be things that you might think about search results, how things are coming out. Also in pre-populating search results, we know that this is fairly effective. If you haven't tried it, it may very well be worth trying it for your audience. So making, we know spelling errors are issues. We know how can people drill down further. I'm a mom to 2 girls, as Kelly kind of said before, and we are, women sizing, girl sizing, and toddler sizing. And when I go to search for dresses, I often don't necessarily think about which one is one of us I'm shopping for. So I want toddler dresses. So I'll start typing in dresses, and when it pulls up toddler, I'm like, great. I don't have to do any other additional filtering on that page. It's taking me right there, real easy. So, those are just different ways that we're using Hick's law today and how you could further employ it. Law of proximity, things that are near or proximate to each other tend to be grouped together. It also speaks to the way we like to view things in a very grid-like format. We don't really like to see this bad version where the logo's down here and then this is up here. Our little navigation might not be centered with our hero. We have all of our footer kind of to one side versus maybe spaced out to accommodate our browser. Our eyes just generally find this more appealing because we think in more of like a grid type of shape. So we want to group what things are. We know that this is all of our footer. We know that this is all of our navigation. And that's kind of the same idea when we talk about content. If you're a news heavy site, you might say these are our latest, these are our reviews, this is our most informational, any one of those sort of things. But we also use this, I think, even more frequently when we talk about navigation. So we do it by putting something on drop downs, what lives underneath something else, the plus and minus, how can we categorize the topics? And I think this also goes back to how are we doing visual hierarchy. It's very clear on this scary mommy navigation exactly which ones are the main categories and which ones are the subcategories and how they kind of line up and into one another. And applying it to forms, which we'll see again at the very end of this presentation, but I always think that this one's kind of an interesting one to talk about. Breaking your forms into sections that are relevant to one another. Think about a checkout process for a retail site. There can be 6 fields alone associated with entering in your credit card information. Your name on card, which could be 1 to 3 fields, your credit card number itself, an expiration date, a CVC code. There could be up to 5 fields for addresses, your address line 1, 2, city, state, zip, and for both billing and shipping individually in some instances. And that's not even including things like your coupons, your gift cards, or any other, sort of site credit you might have. That's over 18 fields. That can feel really daunting if it's just in a listed format. But if someone breaks it out and says, oh, what's my shipping address? Oh, that's easy. I can do those 5 fields. What's my credit card information? Oh, here are those 5 fields, right? Like you can dissect the information. You can make it seem more reasonable, as well as, I don't know about anybody else, I often fill in all my information and then I need to go run and find my credit card in order to enter in that information. It gives me a stopping point to be like, okay, I can do this. Now I can go get what I need and finish it up. Rather than looking at it from top to bottom and being like, well, I don't have this, and just walking away. When we talk about Jacob's laws, users spend most time on other people's sites, not just yours. We all believe that our sites are the most user-friendly, the best, most forward-thinking, all of that. But it also means that that's really not true. We are not the sun. They do not revolve all around us. Instead, users often prefer your site to work just like everybody else's. Sometimes being on the cutting edge isn't always the best. Common usage is you might have a really cool way to display that something is checked, not checked, turned on, not turned on. But if it's not pretty standardized, people are not going to understand whether or not they actually did it correctly. So this is just an image that basically shows we all know what it means when something is enabled or disabled, with the, faded out versus colored in, nothing in there versus something in there. And it gets confusing if you're looking at it, a switch and it's enabled. It's better, if it turns a color, we can just identify it faster, because that's the way we're common to see it across many sites. But how else is it used? In 2019, and honestly, these headers haven't changed a whole lot since 2019. These are the most viewed web pages that lived out in the internet. You'll notice that there are some common features around all of them, kind of logo, search bar, account related information. That's kind of the pattern. that they all employ. It's really interesting to see how similar they are. And this was definitely back in the day when they were even more like less associated with one another in some ways. But these all kind of exist today. And we can take that same thought process to maybe how retail often operates, and they're not much different. Most retail sites are the same as those other 5 sites with logo, search bar, account. But I specifically wanted to also talk about, it's not just how all your general account. When we talk about retail, we often see that it's specific account login, your image, what's your credit card saved information, and then your cart is the furthest on the right. And that is seen across all of these websites. And last but not least, my favorite one in our psychology principles is around dual coding theory. And this is about expanding and promoting new knowledge through both verbal association and visual imagery. And verbal association can also be related as read or written. And so people are able to recall information faster and learn quicker when they pair images and words. I know this has been a very popular thing for us to test in the last few years with great success, trying different iconography or visual representations to pair along with headlines so people understand. So LinkedIn is the image on the left, and they're really saying, hey, this is what our recruiter features are on our site. And you start to understand. And I think Nordstrom's does it really well on the far right, where they're talking about gift options, and you can notice on no matter what product you're on, oh, does this one come with a gift kit? Does this one have gift messaging, gift wrapping? What is the different association? You know exactly where to look because it has those imagery recall associated with it. How else is it used? We use this when we show and tell our products. I see this on a lot of B2B related sites in particular, where we have that image on the left, which talks about what our product does or how it interacts. Sometimes this one's actually a GIF related one, and it zooms in as to how Envision works. And on the right, it gives a little bit more conversation of what's actually happening. So in case you're not following along from just your scan, it provides a little bit of additional detail on how their freehand software works. Another way you might not cognitively be doing this today, but you probably have some sort of product imagery associated with the product name. I know I couldn't name what all of my clothing items are called, but I definitely know what a black leather jacket is. And especially if I see a video of it, I'm going to then further associate different cool features of why I want to buy this product. It's kind of like, how can you show and tell what your product is? And dual coding really kind of helps emphasize that show and tell piece. The next one is my own personal life hack associated to this. This was my forgotten shopping list last week. And this is now how I make all of my to-do lists or grocery lists in life because of this dual coding theory. And I was going to Target and I was like, okay, I know I need all these things. And so I draw little icons next to what I write. I then forgot my list at home, but I will be happy to say I remembered all of the items. And part of it is this because it's how you learn and how your brain can then remember and pull from short-term memory. So
can we hire you to make little icons for all of our shopping lists and all of our to-do lists? This is amazing. Yes, exactly. Justin says you need to make a grocery list template. Amazing.
Yeah. So last few minutes, we can quickly go through this. A lot of it is just more, hey, you'll recognize these theories and other things that we do. That's my goal here, where we talk about, again, how can we further reduce that cognitive load? How can we provide clarity through field structures, create layouts that reduce confusion, talk about error prevention and reducing mental stress, and then finally CTAs. This is just general information. I hope most of your sites employ this, although I will, we've definitely all been on a site where maybe some of these have been, abused. Have a label. We know what we need to fill into the field. Avoid labels as placeholders, because once we click in there, we might walk away, we might forget, we might not remember. My short-term memory isn't always great. Don't use all caps. We're not yelling at our people. And keep your labels short. As fun as it is to have a quirky little phrase, Sometimes it's unnecessary if we just want to get people through, and especially we know form fill rates can be one of our funnel related issues. And so the less that, we have to use friendly terminology that might confuse or make people drop off, the better. So sometimes being direct is more important. Providing clarity through field structures. We kind of already talked a little bit about entering credit card information, but if we can also match the length and the structure of the inputs, that will help. That's kind of that law of proximity. So we know that we need our 12-digit or 16-digit credit card number. We need our month and our year for our expiration date. We know we need 3 or 4 for our CVC related code. It kind of just draws our eyes directly there. And it's not, again, it looks a little less daunting, the one on the right, than it does on the left. And form fields should look like form fields. Having an empty line, not knowing exactly where to click can sometimes make it a little bit crazy for someone to try and figure out what they're doing. And this goes back to the isolation effect. Call out what you want them to see, what you want them to do. And then using the appropriate input types. I actually filled out a survey form the other day, which I had a comments line that looked like that rather than it being open. And I literally had to re-highlight all of my text, copy it into a Word document, and make sure what I said was, reasonable and made sense, because I couldn't see all of it because all I was given was a single line. And then in there. So Kelly, you just sent me a message, but I did not get it all before it popped off of my screen.
Sorry, I was tagging you in your answer. I answered for you.
No worries. I only muted the SDI chat. I should have muted the TLC one too. Sorry, guys. Or not muted, I suppose, if there's lots of questions in there. So I think what I saw though was, it's not just have the label inside the field. More than happy. So if you see this law of proximity with the showing what numbers need to go in here, that's great. But just make sure we also say credit card number at the top versus that just being kind of the grayed out numbers on the inside. So best practices with field layouts that reduce kind of your confusion. This goes back to that law of proximity. This is really kind of that example I talked you through before. If we can break things down, if we can move things onto multiple lines, it shortens your fields. That's kind of just what these 2 images are, even this one's showing for sure. So if we break everything out to be the exact same line and the exact same size and they all have their same line, it looks twice as long as this one over on the far right. And if we do it this way, we're like, well, what is this? Why do they need this? Why do they need this? Versus here we're saying, this is how we personally contact you. This might be how we do contact you for work, or this is your top information and this is your bottom. So it breaks it out a little bit more. The other one is make sure, this goes back to the Hicks law or even Jacob's law. We want your sites to kind of work like others do. We want them all to look the same. So present checkbox and radios vertically. Gets a little bit more confusing, especially even with screen sizes or changing if things are not listed in that respect. And if there are less than 6, show all. If there are more than 6, do a drop down. It's kind of the best practice. Error prevention and messaging reduces mental stress. I'm sure you've all tested some form of this out there, and that is an important thing, again, to call out about heuristics. This is making decisions and judgments without the full information, so not everything works for everybody. That's why we test, that's why we optimize, but these are good reasons to kind of test and optimize your sites for them. But obviously omit unneeded fields. That goes back to Hicks law. If you're not going to be able to use how did you hear about us, if it's just to give kudos internally, that might be something that takes a little bit longer for people to complete a form and might make them drop off. It might be worth trying to remove it. And showing your errors in line. Just saying error found or something's not working in this doesn't necessarily tell us why or where. I've definitely been filling out forms and just says cannot submit. And I'm like, well, what's wrong? So then if you can highlight where it's wrong, that's even better. And then obviously best, it would be tell me exactly why it's wrong. So it said enter email. I obviously entered an email address, but it wouldn't go through because this one already exists. This is even better because then it says go log in. So now here's your solution to your problem. And then CTAs, make your buttons task specific. So don't say sign up if it's a submit, if it's really sign up, or don't say sign up if you want them really to be logging in. Let's not, kind of confuse the customer. Let's make sure that their cognitive load stays low. They know exactly what they're doing. And this is that isolation effect again. Buttons should be different than fields. I feel like this one's obvious, but yet I ran into another site that had that as well. They all just liked their color scheme a lot. So keeping that in mind. So quick recaps. I have a couple of these one pagers that will be at the end of the deck when I think Kelly shares out the deck. If not, we can definitely share them. Again, there's that link to that ideation white paper, which talks more about how to build a heuristics framework, how to deploy it, but also a ton of other ideation related methodologies. But things that you should think about when you're designing for viewing. It's all about your layout. It's about the type of content you have in there and addressing as many accessibility issues as possible. When we talk about the different psychology principles, we want to reduce stress and cognitive load by really following some pretty simple, which seem like gut instincts, honestly, on a lot of this stuff, to increase awareness of the elements you want them to focus in on. It's all about how can we make it as easy as possible for them to go from point A to point B. And the forms should be intuitive and follow all of those psychology principles that we talked about in how you're designing and laying out your pages as well. Any questions? I know the chat's been active.
I'm looking through to see if there's any that weren't answered. There's a lot of questions about sharing, which we're obviously will be doing. Nick asked about the inner form labels and about the fact that, it can help shrink
like length of form.
Yeah.
But it's like a fine line. And again, it goes back to like whether or not you should test, right? We're using the best knowledge available. You might have a user base who's very intuitive and knows exactly, I think it also goes to how many form fields you have. But it would be interesting to test if you didn't just have them in line and you put them on top. Does it reduce your form completion rate? Does that added a couple points of line really affect how it's happening, or does it provide more clarity? So it is something to kind of walk through and test and to try. That's why it's a heuristic.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, like, heuristic is one method, right? The ideation white paper that Teresa's talking about covers 6 different methods, and you want to gather evidence for your hypotheses for your test, regardless of where they're coming from. But the idea with heuristics is it gives you another input of evidence to use for your hypotheses to make stronger hypotheses, and maybe the evidence supporting evidence from heuristics says don't. But from behavioral analysis, maybe you look at the data and you've got one form that does it one way and one that does it the other, and it disagrees. Well, that's why we test, right? So we put those in the test and find out, what works better.
What I was gonna say, so Justin and I last year at the DAA conference, we did a workshop using 3 different heuristics was one of them. We looked at comparative, and then we also looked at some usability, and how could you combine all 3 methods to get that super strong because statement associated with your hypothesis that you really felt confident in either moving forward or like it was a high priority test you definitely wanted to get out the door. And so you could take this sort of heuristic principle, and then if you have some sort of budget or ability to do a usability test, hey, why not test it on some of your people to get that further evidentiary? Okay, so or look at how your competitors are doing it. Or what do their form fields look like, or how is it being communicated? And then you get more and more evidence to kind of build it forward and bring it out to light. Awesome.
And Matt Gershoff says, I love this since it gave a theory to help drive the process rather than just random actions. Great job, Theresa. And he's leaving, but says super informative. Nate says, somewhat related, this book and accompanying site about micro interactions is pretty cool. I will grab that link and share that. And for those, I had a couple people who were having a hard time getting into the TLC chat, so I put that for you in the Zoom chat as well. We have about 5 minutes left. If anybody has any lingering questions that we want to answer, otherwise we'll say goodbye and stop the recording, and I'll send out the PDF, which of course includes those cheat sheets she mentioned, the links to the white paper if you want to go in more detail on this topic as well as the many other ideation methods that we cover. And I would be remiss to not point out and thank Matt and Nate Gershoff, Matt and Nate Weiss of Conductrix, who co-sponsored the white paper. So thank you all. And of course, to the SDI team that put the white paper together, thank you, including you, Theresa. Any lingering questions? All right. Thanks all. Until next time, should be another chat, another live conversation. I'm not going to announce the topic yet because it's between two different folks who are debating on time. But the next two topics are set and should be fun like today, and hope to see you there. So thanks all.
Thank you.